Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. We're looking to present a clear understanding of the current situation and the potential hazards and roadblocks that are going to impact us between now and the end of this year and through into next year relating to importations and exports, predominantly with the European Union. Before we start today's meeting and move through to our agenda, a small number of housekeeping rules in that it would be beneficial if you keep the webinar in the presentation mode, and we will be taking questions through the Q&A function. We will try and endeavour to answer as many as we can, but we'll follow up after that today. So we have a lot of ground to cover today, and our panelists will be talking extensively about the topics, starting with introductions. We'll then move through the list of items to include where are we now, challenges ahead, the 4 C's impact model, customs and global trade, rules and regulation timelines, key challenges and the economic impact of such, current state and future key challenges and risks, business risks of non-compliance, risk factors resulting in non-compliance, and how to mitigate some of these risks and impacts in terms of regulations and compliance, with a follow-up and close session as we go forward.
Okay, so hi, my name is Keely Woolley from KW Consulting Services Limited. I'm founder and manager director of them, and today I will be covering off my role in terms of Brexit risk management and strategy management. And I have 24 years of experience within FTSE 100 global manufacturing environment, where I've provided expertise in strategy development, value creation and delivery. And over the last 4.5 years, actually it's moved on a bit now, I was responsible for the delivery of the Brexit programme throughout the supply chain in order to help them to continue trade. And I help them establish the customs rules, the regulations and requirements to identify the risks and impact and mitigation for the delivery. Okay, thank you.
My name is Dominic McGough. I'm the managing partner of Group Plus. I've got too long, but over 42 years in the supply chain, and started extensively through customs brokerage in the port of Liverpool, and then worked my way through various roles throughout the world in terms of global transportation. For the last 20 years, I've been working with extensively data in processes, and I've been working to manage large data to be compliant in both a freight audit and a customs role. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Holton. I've 17 years trade compliance experience in a mix of manufacturing, forwarding and brokerage businesses. My speciality is customs operations, which is more around understanding and interpreting laws and regulations, and then putting in place real and practical compliant processes that work for businesses. Thank you.
God, who's that? Good afternoon. Conor Anderson is my name. I'm the token Irishman that they've invited onto the call today, because we do thankfully have a couple of Irish people interested in customs. I'm the original poacher turned gamekeeper. I was in the freight forwarding business for many years, and then we were dealing with a very small software company called Microsoft, who realized they knew very little about their own supply chain and logistics, and they asked me to come in and start up and manage a supply chain and logistics group, which I did. And then after 8 years, Bob Arnold joined and decided, if it's not a core competency of Microsoft, let's outsource it to a third party. So I spent the last 18 months of my career in Microsoft outsourcing it to a third party. And since I left in 2007, I've been trying to help organizations like yourselves not make the mistakes that we could afford to make, because it costs us 76 cents to make a copy of Office and we charge you $600 for it. So my NDA is now finished, so I can say that now. So that's me.
Thank you. So just using the Brexit 4 C's impact model, just as a reminder, in January, It's safe to say that obviously the Brexit transition took place, and it certainly delivered on everything that we anticipated and more. There are many businesses that felt like they was Brexit ready and were hard hit. The level of chaos was underestimated. Organisations were unprepared. Paperwork requirements weren't clear. They didn't understand the rules around the Incoterms, who was essentially responsible and accountable for the actual import itself. Then we also had a situation where some of the brokers essentially were oversold and hugely overstretched, and a lot of that was down to the fact that their customers was providing paperwork that was incorrect, so they was doing so much chasing up and following up. And this led to lead times that were in excess of a week, and some are still facing those challenges. And a risk of losing work as a result of that. We also had new systems that were implemented at the last hour, such as TSS. I'm sure you're aware that even the people that owned the systems wasn't clear about what those rules were. And then along with the customs systems, you also had ones that was updated in Ireland, for instance, and subsequently the brokers weren't allied on the new changes, and that had a knock-on effect with them. And then we also had a situation where the rules around the release of trailers and ownership and responsibility, people were struggling with. Paul, if you can move on one more, please. Then, in terms of the current state, July presently, there are many organisations where they think the dust has settled, and subsequently they're taking their foot off the pedal. And despite that, they're actually shifting still between chaos and correction, and that's because there's still new rules that are unclear. There are product changes that are taking place with them. They get new customers or new suppliers, and with that brings an uncertainty about what those rules are in terms of commercial agreements, their Incoterms, and also whether they've got any duty that needs to be applied, what the preferential treatment is, the origins of those products, and any of the implications that are associated to that. Along with that, we also had the first submissions of the supplementary declarations that needed to be implemented in June. Tom will obviously pick that up in more detail, but obviously that was another challenge for people that wasn't aware that they needed to present those. In terms of our ideal target position, obviously we want to be starting to move towards compliance, not just within customs, but also within our organisations, and looking at things like our processes, procedures, reducing our brokers and making sure that our system's more aligned across the business. However, what we're actually in terms of situation is that we're moving back towards a situation where we're in chaos, because there are new rules and regulations that are being introduced into the UK at various times, potentially from November, and I'll touch on that in a moment, through to January. And those implications within organisations could lead back to further delays and impacts across the supply chain and potential non-compliance because they're not aware of what those changes are. Financial penalties, criminal proceedings, logistics delays, and so on and so forth. So if you click on a few more, Paul. And then obviously from an ideal position, we would like to be aiming towards a level of continuity where we're focusing on our strategic direction, and we're starting to work with our supply chain partnerships and looking at their processes and systems to see how we can align things and try to find solutions that can help mitigate the level of risk around compliance or non-compliance, should I say. Thank you. If you move on. So just as a reminder of some of the changes that are taking place and where we are. So we've got the customs regulations that have been introduced in UK. January, we was just doing like the full export declaration process, but we also introduced a simplified process, CFSP and EIDR, which Tom will talk about in more detail, but that obviously was introduced earlier in the year and some businesses took advantage of that. And that's where we need to be clear that the supplementary declarations are being posted at the right time based on the requirements that have been agreed. Within the EU, obviously they was doing the full process, so they've already had that implemented. But in the UK, we are not introducing the full import declaration process until January. There are many businesses that have taken advantage of that, but there are businesses that haven't, particularly with our forwarding agencies where the simplified process has been kicked in. There's also an indication that in November, we have the sanitary and phytosanitary rules that were relaxed being introduced in November, and then full ones in January. The timeline is not being absolutely confirmed because they do keep on shifting that out. But obviously, as businesses, you need to be prepared. Then, of course, in parallel to the full import declarations, there will be the safety and security declarations that will be required. And then, obviously, a lot of businesses have already experienced the requirements for ISPM 15, which is for the heat treatment of things like pallets, boxes, crates, and everything that's made of wood. Then there is the full transition of the CDS system from Chief. There's still sort of handover period going on, and that when that would be fully implemented, we're not clear. But the indications are that it takes 4 times longer to process the documentation. Then, of course, in July, we had IOSS that was introduced, and everything that was under £150 requires a low value simplified declaration, which creates more work. Okay, if you can move forward, please. Over to you, Dominic.
So what does this mean? The key challenges are we've now got over 180,000 traders who've never actually traded before in a customs environment. Add to that the time to process, the 400 million declarations that are being created by Brexit for the inbound and the outbound, the stock outages in supermarkets, not just relating to driver shortages. And then we've seen a massive increase in transportation costs. This number is a conservative amount in that it's really calling about the brokerage. The example we have is a client who's moving trailers from Manchester to Aachen in Germany. And in December, those trailers cost around £2,000. With a slight increase year on year, they went up to 2,400. And now the customs declarations, both in the UK and Germany, or Holland, as the case is, are accounting for another £900. Anyway you cut that, it's a 45% increase in terms of the brokerage. And if you add in the rate of 400, there's a 65%. So now we're seeing an impact that's going to impact retail pricing. And that's really going to cause some challenges to the supply chain as we go forward. And we're talking about products that's been locked in containers because at the early part of the year, the documentation wasn't correct. Thank you.
So into the UK, we have various ways of declaring imports to customs. You can either make a declaration of various sorts at the border, or you can defer the declarations to a later date. So what does that mean? A declaration at the border means when the goods arrive into said country, they stop at the border and they complete customs formalities. And they either clear goods into another customs regime, like bonded warehousing or inwards processing, or you clear them into free circulation and you pay that duty and tax that is due. So then sort of getting onto Keely's point around the CFSP EIDR, what is that? So effectively, it's a deferred declaration. And in the lead up to Brexit, customs talked a lot about the lack of trained resource within themselves and brokers, and they talked about border delays of up to 2 weeks. To help alleviate some of these delays, they offered out to all businesses this opportunity to apply for EIDR, which stands for Entry into Declarants Records. And it basically means that providing you, your broker or your forwarder has applied and been granted this EIDR authorization, they only need to make a record of the goods arriving at the time of arrival, and then the goods can move freely past the border with no formal declaration required until up to a period of 6 months later. So as you can imagine, there was a large uptake of people wishing to use EIDR. With businesses, with companies able to take a cash flow benefit by delaying duty payments, but also within the brokerage and freight areas, as they simply didn't have the resource, the trained resource to complete all the declarations in a timely manner at at that point of import. The full or supplementary declaration, so sort of moving away from EIDR to the to actually making your submission to custom, the full or supplementary declaration has to be made to HMRC, and it can be made anywhere from the first day after the goods arrive to up to 6 months after the goods arrive. And this is the point when you actually tell HMRC what has been imported, and then you pay any subsequent duty or tax that's due. And again, just going back to Keely's point earlier, entries into EIDR that were made in January had to have the supplementary declaration completed by June 26th. So it gives businesses a good wide window in order to sort of get their ducks in a row, as it were, and make these customs declarations in a compliant way, for them. But I just want to know, CFS EIDR will not continue as it stands into 2022. So although we've talked about a 6-month window between goods arriving and declarations having to be submitted, that time frame is now reducing month on month. And what I mean by that is goods entered in December will have to have, so goods entered into EIDR in September will have to have their supplementary declaration submitted in the same month. So January through to June, you've got 6 months, and now every single month is just reducing down 1 month at a time. So it's it's a very nice tool, but just be careful with it and make sure that you or your forwarder or your broker has in place the resource to, or is getting the resource in order to pick up those additional declarations. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So as I mentioned before, the full entries for the import declarations must be implemented in January. And the implications of this and the advice we've already got from the likes of KPMG and companies like that is that we need to start looking at our inventory, both on the supply and demand side, and exactly the same we did in January. Now, the reasons for this is obviously, as is mentioned, that we've got the full requirements in terms of paperwork that will need to be implemented. There's an anticipation that there will be additional delays at ports because the increased volume of traffic. We're also waiting for things to actually be carried out. There's increased requirements around compliance and complexity because everything's being done on a day of transit. We've then got increased customs checks that will be taking place in terms of completeness, correctness, adherence, and that subsequently has a knock-on effect from the SPS paperwork, and there'll be additional checks from that. And we've also got the issues surrounding the system capacity and where process times will be impacted because we're using new systems. And as mentioned before, with CDS, there's the increased effort and there's also the increase in paperwork that's coming through from ISS. There's also the resource capacity issues that Tom has mentioned. They've got 30,000 shortage of fully trained import clerks doing the paperwork, which will then compound it. So increased delays in supply chain, increased issues around capacity with warehousing and driver availability, and then there's also increased costs. Thank you. As I've already mentioned, there's also a target of November for the first introduction of sanitary and phytosanitary, but this will then increase in full requirements in January. Dates still need to be confirmed, but as I've mentioned before, similar to the import declarations, there's expected delays through the supply chain, refusal or destruction of goods because the paperwork hasn't been correct or the inspection's not in place, and also increased costs. And these are for things like animal products, fisheries, high-risk food and feed, and also plants and plant products. There'll be new controls in places in terms of import pre-notifications, health certification, document checks. There's also the physical checks that will need to take place. And there'll be agreed entry points for those that have got those types of products. And then they also need to be making sure that they've organised official veterinary checks for live animals and products of animal origin. Thank you.
Okay, back to me again. So just when it comes to non-compliance, it's something that we all need to be very understand what the risks are for us. I deal with companies every day who say, I'm dealing with Billy Bob Thornton, customs clearance broker. He's fantastic. He does everything for me. But I've signed a direct representation form, and therefore that's his get out of jail free card. So the fact that they're responsible for filling in the form is one thing, but you need to realize that you're accountable for what they say. And there's a hell of a difference between being responsible and being accountable. If there are issues with regard to non-compliance, yes, they will look at the declarant, but that declarant is working directly for you as a third-party provider, and your name is in the importer of record or the exporter of record. Your VAT number is being used. So if there is a non-compliance issue, then it's going to fall on your door rather than theirs. And that's not to say that freight forwarders do anything incorrectly or just to speed up things, but if they're getting misinformation or disinformation or not understanding rules of origin, and there's no origin on that product, and they've put in Sweden when the product was actually made in China, and you benefit from an agreement to TCA because you're not paying any double duty on it, then unfortunately you're going to be held responsible for that. So we do have instances whereby organizations and companies, and I always say this to people, if you have a trade compliance manual and you have very clear instructions and processes for people, and then Michelle goes and ships to Saddam Hussein in Iraq, then you're dealing with a HR issue. But if you don't have a compliance manual and you've never told Michelle that she shouldn't be shipping to Saddam Hussein, then that's a company issue, and that's a much bigger problem to deal with. So I can deal with Michelle and I can deal with that through the HR process. But if customs come in and they look to say, well, Michelle was only doing, she didn't know any different, to go right back to the point of this, ignorance is not a defense. We cannot defend because we didn't know. When we do our training courses and we speak to people, they talk to me about dual use goods and they talk to me about compliance and white codes. And they all say, how am I supposed to know that? You should know. If you're in the business of importing or exporting, customs are there not to tell you what to do. They're there to check what you've done. And that's a big problem that people have assumed. Sure. And a green routing doesn't mean it's right, by the way. It means you have permission to proceed. So an orange or a red certainly has issues for you, but a green, up to 3 years after, they can still come back and say, you claimed a preference on that particular shipment. Show me where the certificate of origin for that Chilean wine that you claimed a reduction on preferences for. So just because it's green doesn't mean it's right. Just because it works through doesn't mean it's going to be a problem. So incorrect declarations, you can absolutely see that the fines associated with it are up to 20, 25 grand for simple, and they are cumulative, by the way. Just because you get one fine doesn't mean you won't get a second one. So while you're there, while you're looking at incorrect declarations and you're looking at different delays, you need to also understand that the forms and the documentation and anything that you put in box 44, whether it be a bill of lading, whether it be a certificate of origin, you have to be able to provide copies of that when it goes for queries. So we do have cases whereby people here have told their staff to make declarations or incorrect declarations and have been fined. We did have, even in Ireland quite recently, we had an individual, a managing director of a company, who actually instructed all of his staff to declare garlic that was coming in as red peppers and green peppers. He went to jail for 2.5 years, as well as back all the money that they were supposedly going to save. So the difference between garlic and red peppers ended up costing him 3.5 years of his liberty, plus the reputational damage that was done as a result of the company. That company still gets 80% plus orange and red routings when they're lodging their entries. So yes, great that you have a very good, reliable broker, but remember, you're absolutely 100% accountable for what they say in all of those 54 boxes on the C88. Thank you.
And then I'm just going to follow up on what on what Connor was saying there. the major areas of risk of non-compliance tend to fall, well, they fall in many categories, but what we've got here is we've got sort of 7 of the main categories that businesses tend to fall foul. And I don't want to come across all doom and gloom. That's not really who I am. But I do want to highlight to the people on this webinar just some of the issues that potentially or commonly are faced, so that you can make sure that you don't trip yourselves up. So I'll start with customs laws and regulations. And for me, this is a dangerous one. And I see businesses review this, or I've seen businesses review this once or even once a year. And as we touched on earlier, the law changes all the time. The inclusion of EIDR and subsequent removal in January 2022, just show that things are always changing and evolving in customs. Duty rates change, products get added or removed from anti-dumping lists. As Connor said, sanction. You've got Michelle who's selling us to Saddam Hussein. Sanctions are imposed or removed on countries or areas or people. Meaning that it changes who we can and can't do business with. And there are so many things on top of those that I really don't have the time sort of to get into in today's session, but it's just critical that you and your business are constantly reviewing laws and regulations, identifying changes and the impact they have on your business. Make sure you signed up to get information, and attend talks by the Big Four, your local ports, your HMRC officer if you have one, or your local HMRC, and get help from industry experts. And then looking at your third-party providers, it's very important. Understand who they are, the knowledge they have, how serious they are about compliance and customs. Does your logistics partner know if they don't stop and discharge a T1 correctly, they leave you and your business open to fine and repayment of taxes? Does your forklift driver or does the forklift driver 3PL warehouse that you use know it's a bonded facility? And what they can and can't do with the stock. And again, they, at the end of the day, they're an extension of your company, and what they do and how they act can have serious consequences for your business and your relationship with customs. Another one that Connor very briefly touched on, rules of origin. Again, do you understand them? Don't assume. Just because you bought an item from inside the EU doesn't mean that it qualifies for EU preferential origin. Ask for declarations from your suppliers. Ask for how the content was calculated. And if you can't prove that the origin, or you can't prove that the goods qualify, don't take the preference. Pay the duty, and then do your homework, and look at it. And if you can prove that it does in fact qualify, you can recover that, that duty from customs. And in my opinion, it's always better to overpay customs and reclaim it rather than to owe money to customs. And then looking at customs valuation, how do you value your goods for customs? What method of valuation should you be using in your business? And I'd say for most people, very general term, for most people, it's valuation method 1, but be sure, understand all of them. It's normally one of the first questions that customs will ask you in an audit. And it can set the tone for that audit. You get that question right, and it gives customs the confidence that you know what you're doing. But if you get it wrong, or you don't know the answer, it's likely that audit will become very, very much more detail orientated. And then if we look at AEO recognition, so AEO is the approved economic operator, and for us people in the normal world, it's the gold standard with customs. That's what it is. It's the gold standard. If you've been applied, if you have applied or you've been granted AEO, then you certainly want to keep it. And with it, the ability to utilize simplifications and the cost savings that come with it due to the fact that you have to pay sort of lower guarantee levels. It can be 0 guarantee levels. Getting AEO is not actually that difficult. You pass audits and you prove a level of compliance. And it's you get granted it at a point of time. Keeping AEO is tough. AEO is not just an authorization. It's not just a tick in the box. It's a way of doing business. It requires buy-in from the most senior managers, to your middle managers, to your shop floor, to your admin. It's a way of doing business, and it means that you always do what is right. in the eyes of customs. And if we look at customs brokers, choose wisely. Don't just look for the cheapest option, look for accreditations. Ask for examples of business that they handle. It might cost a few pounds or a few euro more, but the amount of time and effort it will save you in the long run, it'll pay for itself 100 times over. And again, just going back to what Connor said, you need to remember that it's likely they will be acting in your name. So this is when Connor was talking about direct representation. And if they're acting in your name, when you're audited, you are liable for any mistakes. You are liable for non-compliances, and the lovely fines and penalties that come with it. And God forbid, any jail time that could be added on. And then finally, tariff classification. And to date, this is the highest focus point for HMRC. Some would argue that it's slowly shifting over to rules of origin, but tariff classification determines the percentage of duty that you pay to HMRC when importing goods. And if you take customs back to the core, and look at what HM Revenue and Customs are, they are tax collectors. It is a revenue collection. Revenue collection is their primary focus. So making sure that your tariff classification is correct is very important. And tariff classification, getting tariff classification can be tricky in itself. And if I look at my past, I've worked in manufacturing, I can pick up a part. Is this part of an engine, or is it a gasket? Technically, to the untrained eye, both are correct, but customs will expect the most granular level of classification, and any incorrect classification or more patterns of incorrect classification identified by HMRC can start audits, and those audits will allow, again, as Connor said, will allow them to go back up to 3 years. Corrections will be made and revenue collected. So if you've underpaid, or if you've declared it as a gasket at 3% and it's a part of an engine if you've declared a part of an engine at 4.2% and it's a gasket at 6%, just making those percentages up, potentially customs can go back 3 years and make you pay that difference. So it's really, really important that your tariff classification is done thoroughly and is accurate. It's not an activity to take lightly in the eyes of customs. So that's enough doom and gloom for me. So thank you very much for listening there.
The fatal mistake of the silent button. So thank you, Tom, appreciated. Obviously there's a lot that we've covered off there, and there are a lot of areas that we will need to be doing some follow-up, which Dominic will pick up in a moment. But, in terms of, how we can help, how can KW Consulting Services help you as organisations to try to mitigate the risk of the changes that are taking place, or also evaluate your level of compliance and look at some of the flows, and if there's any key challenges, then what I can do as a business is do a business risk evaluation. We can provide a gap analysis and a mitigation plan to help you to remove the level of risk. And we'd also provide professional project management to help implement those changes. With that, we'll bring you some structure and combine it with flexibility, because we're also aware that there's not one size fits all with every organisation. So we do have to look at every single flow that's coming through and the way you approach business and the type of organisation that you are. We'll provide expertise with pragmatism, and we'll also provide agility combined with control. So we're adjusting the needs to fit with the requirements of your business. So if I just pass you on to Dominic, and he can then start talking through to you as how solutions can help you to mitigate that level of non-compliance that Tom was talking through, and Connor, so it then takes out as much risk as possible through automated processes. So I'll just hand you over to Dominic. Thank you.
Thank you, Keely. So looking at the applications and looking at automation, and we've talked about an enormous amount of paper still being involved within the supply chain. We talk about the growth. Today, we've gone through that. And what we've designed is the ability to use this product to extract from paper, to meet the market demands, and to be able to review the submissions prior to the broker, and indeed supply the broker with the products or the information to be submitted, which then mitigates our risks because we're now working with the broker and the broker is working on data that's been authorized by yourselves, and digitizing that to use the methodology. So we're now able to save time because it's an automated process using some AI and machine learning technology. And it's based on business rules that are created for our client based on their understanding of their business, which then can be confirmed with HMRC or Irish customs, depending on the import or the export. This allows the processing to be done in a controlled environment, which then means that the quality of the data is far superior to any manual intervention. Next, please, Paul. So we talked previously about creation of the declaration and the creation of the data to confirm the declaration. And now we're really talking about how you can confirm that. And one of the things that we provide is using MSS data from HMRC, we've been able to build an application to take that information and cross-reference it to create information and insight against what that data is telling us. We've worked in a cycle where we're receiving from customs on the 10th of the month and producing the reports by latest of 16th. To Tom's point earlier, it means that our clients are in a position where they can be determining the situation with customs and reverting and revising entries prior to being notified by customs of any variances, which is very, very powerful in any discussions with customs. And those are two of the services that are provided to support automation and support giving our clients control of the activities with customs and mitigate these risks that are applicable. Next, please, Paul. I recognize that we've really been drinking from the fire hose today. There's been an awful lot of content, and I appreciate that we've held you back somewhat and we've been delivering the content. This webinar and videos will be available for all attendees who require it. We will and are reviewing all questions that have been provided, and we'll organize ongoing focus workshops based on topics that have been created by today's webinar and future webinars. One of the future webinars will be, in terms of data and the power of it as a BI to monitor the compliance and the continuous improvements. And then we're also, based on client demand, really looking at creating a webinar of how to reduce the risk when chief is decommissioned and how to prepare for that. So we see this as being, and it was initial germ of an idea that Keely came through. And what we've seen from clients is that there's been an embracement. It's an exchange, it's not a diatribe, and we really do appreciate your attendance and support. Keely, anything from you to finish?
No, I mean, at the moment, we've had no specific questions that have come in from the attendees. So I would be interested to know before we leave, because we've got quite a bit of time left. I'd be interested to know if anybody's got any specific questions that they would like answered. And whether we're able to enable that at all, Paul.
Q&A is enabled. Delegates can find the link at the bottom of their screen.
So there's a question there from Kelly Pools. You see that one?
Kelly Poole, yes, there's a question there. Is do we have any idea when Chief will be decommissioned? Now, Dominic, I believe that you was on a call about that the other day. What was the indications?
Yeah, I was on a call with KPMG, and this specific topic came up, and they're indicating that it's going to be through the early part of next year. That was the, and I know this has been said on a number of occasions, but the feeling was that they had been gun shy at releasing the switchover through to Brexit, but they will be looking to support the implementation of the Brexit restrictions using the CDS technology.
Okay. And is there any questions from anybody else at all?
Keely, I have one just on the AEO. That there was a question about the time frame for an AEO. So from there's the immovable feast is the 120 days that they take, customs take. So it could take you 6 weeks, 6 months to prepare. There's 140 odd questions in the self-assessment questionnaire. Depends on how prepared you are for the processes. There's about 35 different processes in there, which would be everything from a visitor policy to a goods inwards policy to a HR policy with hiring and firing. But after you lodge a successful application, customs have 120 days to make a decision on that. They are looking to bring it down, but at the moment it's 120 days then as well. So just for that one then.
Thank you.
There's another question in there now, Keely.
Yeah, so Kelly, the question is obviously from our perspective is whether we've got any idea in terms of the impact there will be with that transition from Chief to CDS. And I think, again, Dominic, I know that you was given some feedback on their overall perception of that.
I mean, it's really perceived that, Chiefs has been like a pair of comfortable slippers. We've all sort of got used to it after a long time of bedding them in. And now all of a sudden we're getting some very hard flip-flops that are going to be hitting the bottom of the soles of our feet quite dramatically. And, it is going to happen. There's too much money invested and there's too much time on this for it to happen.
Okay. And obviously with that, Kelly, we'll make sure that we're able to keep people informed on some of those significant changes that are taking place and the timelines that are taking place as well. So, I mean, another thing that I'd be interested to share, Dominic, I know I've been working with you, some of my clients, in terms of some of the stuff that you're bringing forward in terms of the power of BI. I know I was absolutely blown away by the dashboard that you guys have created, because I think, one of the things that, Tom obviously who's dealing with businesses where he's looking at the MSS data, and he's able to utilize the information that you provide us to be able to make informed decisions around, whether the brokers are being compliant with the information, whether it's got the correct data. When do you perceive those dashboards and everything like that starting to be available as an organisation?
Well, as usual, put me on the spot. We have developed the dashboard application. We're rolling out with some beta clients right now, and it really is something that will be available. Connor, we would say available really towards the end of September. It's because it was interesting. Just a side issue. I had a client today who was asking for some support, and they're using this tool to go backwards and pull everything from January to date, so they can actually see what's compliant, what's non-compliant ahead of the time of the schedule. And that's all back on using data and making that data available. We do have different levels of data requirements. Some customers want the platinum version. Some customers, quite frankly, simply want a report and a dashboard, which we've done. But I would say end of September is when we're really looking at launching that product for all people. Okay.
So when we do the next webinar, then it's based on that, we'll have something to work with. So in terms of anybody else, do you have any more questions to bring to the table?
There are a couple more in Q&A.
Yeah, you've got some from Keith Holdsworth. Keely, what is the typical length of time for an evaluation and then development of a mitigation plan?
Okay, thank you. So obviously, Keith, that does depend on the size of the organisation and amount of flows that they've got. But usually, Tom, I think both of us in parallel did the evaluation on the flows. And that was something that took place over a sort of 2 to 3 week period. in terms of the evaluation. And that does also depend on how much data you've got available up front in preparation for the evaluation to take place. Because what you're doing is looking at ultimately every flow that you've got going through, whether that's with your supplier or with your customers, and understanding the rules that apply with each one of those customers or suppliers, should I say, where they're actually entering, what type of products they are, the level of compliance that's needed. So it's, initially the evaluations over a 2 to 3 week period, and then we would then do the gap analysis to assess where we see any of the risks, but we would do that in parallel with you. And then we're able to then identify where the opportunity is and present back to you a plan of how that would be achieved. So, within the 2 to 3 weeks, we'd be looking at that. And then we then have another sort of week or 2 weeks with you guys to actually follow that through. And obviously the gap of delivery in terms of the programme, that would depend on the organisation and the resources that you've got available for that. What else have we got? Keith, Dominic, how long does it take to set up the Fastnet and the Termanet applications?
Basically, Fastnet can be set up literally within 30 days. Depends on how structured the client is and how structured the submissions are and the data from the elements. And then we've really worked on that so that we've been in a position to implement effectively. Termanet is a standard reporting module that we've built. So that actually is a faster implementation based on the fact that we've got the templates and we know where the data source is and what we're checking. So that would be within 30 days. So we're really trying to make these both models to be once the client makes that decision and makes the compliant decision, we're looking to support that as fast as we can.
Okay. And just to follow on, Jonathan Nucci has asked, how does the Customs Plus software help with shipments between UK and air, and what are the advantages of being able to work on both sides for import and export?
Well, basically, it's a single set of data, which means consistency, which means that you're presenting the same information to the Irish customs as you are to UK customs. One of the challenges we have is a lot of the Asian product, they would determine a HS code that is acceptable for exports from China, but isn't for imports into the UK. Currently still using the same HS codes model as we are with Ireland, but that will change. So it's really down to the ability to take that data, process it quickly, because we're processing data within minutes of receipt, present that to the customs action requirements, and then being able to then present that same data prior to import. So you're really doing an export and import entry with the same key information, but the importer and the exporter both have individual requirements that are married together.
Okay, thank you. A question came from Malcolm Pope. How long do you believe the learning curve for Brexit is going to be? Tom, given as you've been sort of right in the thick of this, what would be your experience so far with the clients that you've been working with?
So what I would say is I think that the learning curve has been very steep. I think people and businesses trip themselves up for the first 3 months. People are now understanding the complexities of customs, not necessarily, they understand that there are complexities and they have to do things a certain way. I don't think they understand why yet. I think, my personal opinion, I think that people will be in a good place in around Q2 next year. And the reason I say that is as I say, we've just gone through this learning curve in terms of Brexit is new. But coming up, for the rest of this year, we've got these continuous changes. We've got the tighter restrictions in terms of health certificates. We've got the removal of EIDR. We've just had the change of the heat-treated pallets. I think that the goalposts are continually moving at the moment, and therefore I would expect that people would have a really good grasp middle to end of Q2 next year.
Yeah. And you know, taking that to stage further, Malcolm, and one of the things that we're recognised is that it's not just the people that are actually dealing with the products and the supply. It's also communicating and training the commercial teams, you know, working with them to build contracts that take into consideration the commercial needs and the impact and decisions that are made in terms of those, the relationships, the lead times, those kind of things. And also with our financial teams, is them understanding the implications within their organisation. So there's lots of training that needs to go on within each department to help them. Just a final question with Keith. He said, is other ports and customs investing in anything to try to reduce the impact that comes? And when do they see that changing in comparison to December? So I'm not sure. Dominic, Connor?
Yeah, the ports are investing. The French have just issued a new computer system that's coming into effect. I know Ireland's doing a similar thing. The Netherlands have improved their computer system. So you are seeing that, and there are changes coming. The challenge really is whether the UK actually goes full Brexit. Mm-hmm. When we went in January this year, Ireland, France, Holland, the rest of Europe went full Brexit, and they insisted on rules and regulations. We made a sort of a backslide and said, okay, we'll push it back another year. And if we do adhere to the rules and regulations, then yes, there will be a lot of issues, and that's why a lot of the ports are scrambling very much with additional land, additional storage. They're tarmacking areas so they can park lorries. And Connor could talk to this from in the Irish situation. They had lots and lots of trucks just being held at the Irish ports. Connor?
There's a couple of things on that. The border control posts, which are there for the food and the phytosanitary, are not being prepared at the moment. They did start and then they stopped. So they're not going to be, I personally believe they're not going to be ready in time for any new regulations come November. So we'll end up with hopefully a Swiss style agreement that will allow us to recognize your standards and our standards and work together, rather than it being a stop and the Marks and Spencers can go back and start storing the chicken tikka masala again that I can buy. But at the moment it's a bit of an issue, but the money was there. It's really waiting to see what's going to happen next, because until we absolutely know there's going to be full regulations, there is investment, but mostly the issues they're going to face are people. They just don't have enough people to deal with the 50,000 officers we spoke about, and we're so far below that number, it's incredible. So while the systems might be getting better, we're going to have a big resource issue, and we will have with trucks and the level. We're at about an 85% green routing in Ireland at the moment, but that's on about 4.5 million shipments. So that still means there's 15% of that, which is, you know, a huge number, 400,000 plus a month not being cleared properly. And you can multiply that number by 30 plus into the UK, and you realize where the issues are going to be. So it's not just about the money, it's also about the technology and the people to manage all of those pieces as well then. And just a final question, I'll take the last one there from Maria. I would also like to understand better how to use the preferential origin rules, but you need about 30 years experience on that, Maria. But at the moment, I think Thomas alluded to it earlier on, a lot of people are making an assumption that if it came from Germany, it was made in Germany, and that's not the case. Obviously, we need to understand, but it goes back to your suppliers, it goes back to everybody in the supply chain understanding where the product was made originally. If you do not do anything with that's called substantial transformation, which is probably about 40% change, if it comes in under one commodity code and goes out under the same commodity code, you can be damn sure it's still on the same country of origin. Unless you substantially transform that, unfortunately, the original country of origin is still going to be the same. But there's an awful lot of things we can help you with there, Maria, but certainly not in the Q&A session in the webinar. But if you do reach out to us separately, we can have a conversation with you about that then as well.
And actually, on that note, Connor, thank you for that. As in terms of follow-up, we would be intending to do a workshop that would be focusing on that, because as Tom will allude to, there's so much information that's associated to that. The final piece on here, the question is from Jonathan. We are actually running out of time, so what we will do is do a follow-up on that question after today. And we will come back to you with more information, Jonathan, and that's around the investment on technology, digitalisation.
Yeah, I think Thomas covered a bit of that with EIDR and CFSP, but yes, they are there, but you need to sign up to that and also be compliant with that. But we can help you with that, Jonathan, as well.
Yeah, okay. So, well, you know, everybody, I'd like to thank you for your attendance today. It's really appreciated. We will, of course, be looking at the questions that you've put forward as well. And if you do have any further questions, that'd be really appreciated. And as Dominic has already mentioned, we will be sharing the content of today, including the video, with you after the event. And then we'll also come back to you about the follow-on questions and what we'll be doing in terms of follow-up workshops and webinars. So thank you for your time, everybody. If you know, each of you want to say your thank yous.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody. Cheerio.
Cheers.